Like we mentioned last week, we are right now in this unique time, this special time referred to as the 3 weeks. This is the 3 week period where we spend time thinking about the destruction of the temple. We spend time thinking about the story of what happened at that time and remembering not just the destruction, remembering the temple. That's even more important than the destruction, right? Instead of focusing on the negativity and focusing on what we lost, we focus on what we hope to achieve in the future, and we focus on the actual building of the Bet HaMikdash, and we hope that in the merit of learning and discussing the Bet HaMikdash, we will merit to the rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash very soon in our times, Bezrat Hashem. Those that have lived through a moment in history, we look back at that moment and we remember it well to the point it's like we lived it. We feel it in a different way than someone who didn't experience it. So, for example, for me, my generation, I look back at 9/11. I lived through it. I remember it very well. I was old enough to experience it and remember it. And even like the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, I think about the first Gulf War and it's like, yeah, that just happened, right? It was just in the 90s, which, yeah, the 90s was 30 years ago, right? So time passes and we don't really see it in that way. But everybody has in their generation the things that happened. I remember my mother would always talk about the assassination of Kennedy like it happened last week. Like she remembers it, and it was something that she would complain that my sisters would learn in school about this historical events, and she would say that's not history. Why are they calling it history? It's current events, right? And we all live through different things, whether it's the fall of communism or actual living with communism, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the stories that happened in Israel. I mean, every generation has their stories, their things that they have experienced and lived, and they remember it as if it happened right now in our times. But what tends to happen is over time, things get forgotten. That experience loses its flavor. We lose the connection with what happened, where we maybe remember it, maybe we still feel it, but for future generations, our kids talk about, my kids talk about the World Trade Center like, what is that? What was that? They never heard of it. They don't know, they don't connect with the idea of 9/11. To them, 9/11 is not any different than World War II. There were both things that happened a long time ago, before they were born. They never experienced it, and they don't have the connection with it like someone like I was there, and I feel it differently. I remember it differently. Especially, I lived in New York, and on the day of 9/11, I was actually in New Jersey, but my sister worked around the corner from the World Trade Center. And I remember that, knowing that she was there and not being able to get a hold of her and all that was going on at that time. So this is what we're talking about, remembering something and feeling how it's current and feeling how it's something that we continue to live and continue to experience even once we move on from that. And so when we talk about Jewish history, we talk about things that happen in Jewish history. There are many, many difficult situations, unfortunately, in our history. There's no shortage of tragedies and disasters in our history. But if we try to figure out what was the worst moment in our history, what was the greatest calamity, the greatest tragedy in Jewish history, for our generation, obviously, would be the Holocaust. But if we look at the whole spectrum of Jewish history, the time that sticks out the most is probably the destruction of the temple. The time of the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem, it was a great, great calamity. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of Jews were killed. Those that survived were taken as captives, and they were taken as captives, and they were sent on exile from Jerusalem, taken to different places around the world. Many of them never to return. We don't even know where they are. We don't know if they even still exist. The 10 lost tribes that have been gone for many, many years, thousands of years. The center of Jewish life was the temple, and that was destroyed, no longer exists. There is no longer the whole experience of the Kohanim, the priests, coming to the temple, the Bet HaMikdash, bringing the sacrifices, doing the service in the temple. All that is gone. The whole experience of Judaism at that time was the temple. 3 times a year we have the festivals. Everybody would travel to Jerusalem and they would experience being in the temple, being in the Bet HaMikdash. It was an awesome experience that would go on, that would happen there at that time. But all that ended with all these Jews that were killed, the destruction of the temple, the exile. Everything came to an end. And it was a complete shift in Jewish life from that point onwards. So how do they deal with it? They're living at this time. The rabbis that are there at the time, they see what's going on. They see the destruction that's happening. And they start to worry about the future of the Jewish nation. What's the future going to be? What does the future look like without a temple? What does Judaism look like without a temple? It doesn't exist. There was no formula for a practicing Judaism without a temple. Today we have a system with synagogues and organizations and programs and things. All that wasn't in place at the time. There wasn't even an organized prayer book. The prayer book came later. All these things that we think of today as normal, as the regular Judaism, didn't exist at that time because everything was centered around the temple. This was the first temple. And then came the second temple, where once again it was rebuilt. It was we once again had the service, and we had a lot of the things that we had from the first temple, but it was never the same. And so they developed things. There were some changes that were made at that time. And then later, after the destruction of the second temple, when once again we were sent into exile, from then on, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of things, a lot of shifts that happened to make Judaism practical for living in exile. We just spoke yesterday about this concept as well. We spoke about this idea yesterday about how the rabbis enacted certain things. They made certain rules that began at that time in order for us to stay connected with our Judaism. There were many restrictions, many rules and regulations that came into being at that time, which were there as a safeguard because we were entering a different stage in our connection with Hashem and with Torah. We needed something to keep strong. But in addition to that, putting that aside, there was a rabbi at that time, a great leader of the Jewish people. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was a true visionary, and he was somebody who really, he saw the big picture. He saw what is happening to Jewish life. He saw the destruction, and he saw the challenges that are coming for Judaism. And so we realized that we need to do something different here. We need to come up with a plan in order to make sure that we don't forget who we are and we don't forget our connection to the temple. And so he came up with 9 rules, 9 new decrees he made, which are referred to as Zecher LaMikdash. Zecher LaMikdash, it's a remembrance for the temple. 9 things that help us remember the temple. For example, in the days of the Bet HaMikdash, on Sukkot, the holiday that we have after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have Sukkot, we eat in the Sukkah, and we shake the 4 kinds, Lulav, Etrog, Adasim, and Aravot, the 4 things that we shake together. How many days do we shake Lulav and Etrog? In the times of the temple, in the Bet HaMikdash, they shook it for 7 days, which was how long the holiday goes for in Israel. But out of the temple, if you were not in the temple, you only shook it 1 day, only the first day of Sukkot. The rest of Sukkot, there was no Lulav and Etrog, only in the temple. After the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, it's not enough to do just 1 day, because now there's no temple, there's nowhere to do 7 days. It should not exist after the first day. Yet, as a Zecher LeMikdash, to remember that in the Bet HaMikdash they shook it for 7 days, we too will shake the Lulav and Etrog for 7 days. And that's why today we shake the Lulav and Etrog for the entire Sukkot, every day of Sukkot, as a remembrance, not as a mitzvah of shaking Lulav and Etrog, rather as a mitzvah to remember the temple. And there are more examples like this. Another one, before we eat bread, we wash our hands for the bread. Why do we wash our hands for bread? It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah. The rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, said that everybody should wash their hands before bread. Why? Because the Kohanim would wash their hands before eating the truma, before eating the holy foods from the Bet HaMikdash. There's no Bet HaMikdash now, there's no truma. We're all impure. So what's the purpose of washing our hands? We're not Kohanim even. Yet, because we want to remember that in the times of the Bet HaMikdash, the Kohanim had to wash their hands. Therefore, to remember it, today we wash our hands before eating bread. So these are just two examples of what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted at that time to make sure that we remember the Bet HaMikdash and we don't forget it. And this idea comes from a verse in the Torah. It was actually taught. The Talmud tells us that the question was answered by Rabbi Yochanan, but not that Rabbi Yochanan, a different Rabbi Yochanan, who lived many, many years later. He lived about 2 centuries after the first Rabbi Yochanan. And he came and answered the question of where do we get this idea from to set up a Zecher LaMikdash, to set up a remembrance for the Bet HaMikdash? What's the source for it? We don't just make up new things. There has to be a source in the Torah. And so he brought a source from the verse in Yirmiyahu and Jeremiah, where it says as follows, "For I will restore health unto you, and I will heal you of your wounds, says God, because they have called you an outcast. She is Zion, there is none that seeks her." And those are the words he caught on to. For there is none that seeks her. In other words, he says, we have an obligation to seek her. We have an obligation to seek Zion, to seek the Bet HaMikdash, to seek the temple. We should always be looking for, trying to find the temple, trying to remember and connect with the temple. And this is the source for the idea that we have to enact things to preserve a future, to preserve a connection to the Bet HaMikdash. And it's not only for the good times, but it's especially for the bad times. For the difficult times, that's when we have to really make sure that we don't lose ourselves. We don't forget who we are. We don't forget where we come from. We have to remember the Bet HaMikdash, remember our connection there, and remember the pinnacle of our glory when we were at our peak, which was at the time of the Bet HaMikdash. And with that destruction, everything started going downhill from there. And so Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wanted to give us a way to hold on to that feeling, a way to hold on to the Bet HaMikdash. Why? Because there's an ultimate goal. The purpose of it all is to bring us to the final redemption. It's all heading on a path. The ultimate path is to come to bring Mashiach and to rebuild the temple in the times of Mashiach, the third temple, which will be the ultimate and final and everlasting temple. And so everything we do today is not only just about remembering the past and not losing what we had, but it's to take us all the way down the path to bring us to the future, to bring us to the actual temple, the Bet HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third temple in Jerusalem. And this was the goal of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. This is what it's all about. Everything that we do is about showing we haven't moved on. We haven't forgotten who we are. We haven't forgotten the goal, the ultimate goal. That's where we're heading. We have to remember the goal is to get back to Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple, to get back to the service of the temple. That's what we need. That's what it's all about. And this was the goal of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And this is how we today continue to remember the Bet HaMikdash and continue to pray for the Bet HaMikdash and demand the Bet HaMikdash. May it come speedily in our days. So what we can do today is by focusing on some of the ideas of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. One of them, like we just mentioned, is washing our hands before bread. It's a very easy mitzvah to do. Before you eat bread, you wash your hands 3 times on each hand, and in this way, you are connecting with a remembrance for the temple. You're remembering the Bet HaMikdash, and you're carrying yourself forward towards the third Bet HaMikdash. May it be rebuilt speedily in our days. Amen.